Welcome back to NextGen Picks. You know what really drives me crazy about the budget TV market right now? You walk into a big box store and there's this massive wall of 55-inch screens under 500 bucks, all blasting the exact same hyper-saturated demo loop. And the boxes, they're just covered in these shiny, aggressive stickers. Motion rate 120, AI-powered processor, direct lit. It all sounds incredible, right? But then you get it home, you mount it on your living room wall, and the reality hits. You go to watch a movie at night, and those black letterbox bars at the top and bottom of the screen are this glowing, cloudy, milky gray. Or, honestly, even worse, you hit the Netflix button on the remote, and you're just sitting there for 3 full seconds waiting for the processor to catch up because the TV's memory is already bottlenecked by menu bloatware. Hi, this is NextGen Picks, and today we're cutting through the marketing garbage because the harsh truth is 90% of the TVs in the sub $500 price bracket are essentially e-waste straight out of the box. They're built to fail or frustrate you within a year. But there are exactly three models this year that actually put the manufacturer's budget into the hardware that genuinely dictates your viewing experience. If you appreciate that we buy these displays with our own money and refuse to take sponsorships from TV brands just to read you their spec sheets, please hit that like button and subscribe NextGen Picks. It's literally the only way we can keep doing these forensic real-world deep dives. All right, let's get into the engineering because you need to know what you're actually paying for here. Let's establish the baseline reality of what a $400 or $500 bill actually buys you right now, because the manufacturers aren't performing magic here. They are playing a brutal zero-sum game of component economics. Every time they add a feature you can see on the box, they are quietly subtracting something you won't notice until week 3 of owning the thing. When you buy a TV in this bracket, the companies know they are dealing with extremely thin margins. So where do they cut the fat? They cut it in the two places that completely dictate your day-to-day sanity, the backlight module and the system on a chip, or the SoC. Let's talk about the processor first because I almost ignored this, and that would have been a massive mistake. You'll see these stickers screaming AI-powered smart engine or neural upscaling. It is frankly marketing fiction. What's actually sitting on the main board of a standard $300 doorbuster is a bottom-tier recycled MediaTek processor paired with, if you are incredibly lucky, maybe 2 GB of RAM. Think about that. Your 5-year-old smartphone has more memory than the screen trying to render 4K video while running a bloated Android operating system. Here's what that actually looks like in your living room. You turn the TV on. You press the Netflix button on the remote. The button clicks, but nothing happens. You wait. You press thinking maybe the IR sensor missed it. Then suddenly the screen flashes black, stutters, and dumps you into the app 3 seconds later. Over time, as these operating systems push background updates and cache more data, that 2-second delay turns into 5 seconds. The remote starts feeling completely disconnected from the television. The UI friction becomes a daily annoyance, and brands do not push firmware updates to fix this. What you buy on day one is the absolute fastest that TV will ever operate. But the bigger crime, the one that absolutely ruins movie night, is the backlight lie. You will see the phrase direct lit plastered everywhere. They make it sound like a premium feature, direct lit LED. All that means is that there's a grid of cheap flashlight bulbs behind the LCD panel, and they are permanently glued to the on position. LCD panels cannot block 100% of the light shining behind them. It's physically impossible, so if you're watching the Batman or any scene set in a dark room, the TV is trying to show you black, but because those direct lit LEDs are still blasting at full brightness behind the panel, the black turns into this distracting, cloudy, milky gray. The letterbox bars at the top and bottom of your screen practically glow in the dark. It completely destroys the perceived depth of the image. It makes a 4K movie look like it's being projected on a dirty bedsheet. This brings me to the first of the only 3 models that actually escape this trap. This is the Hisense U65QF. It's a 55-in panel, and it usually hovers right around $450 to $480, depending on the retailer. Now, Hisense has released a lot of garbage in the past. I'll be the first to admit that. But with the U65QF this year, they did something that fundamentally breaks the curve for budget sets. They put a legitimate hardware-level mini LED backlight into a sub-$500 television. Actually, wait, let me explain why that specifically matters, because mini LED is turning into another meaningless buzzword. In this specific Hisense model, the backlight isn't just a dumb grid of permanently on bulbs. It's divided into hundreds of microscopic independent dimming zones. The TV's processor analyzes the image frame by frame. If the left side of the screen is supposed to be a pitch-black night sky, the TV physically turns off the power to the LEDs directly behind that specific part of the screen. The real-world impact of this is staggering if you're coming from a cheap edge-lit display. I was sitting in my testing room last Tuesday, totally dark, running the opening space sequence of Interstellar. On a standard budget TV, the stars look dull and the blackness of space looks like a glowing fog. On the U65QF, the space was actually black, like the room went dark, but the stars themselves were piercingly bright. We measured the peak. Sustained brightness on this thing in SDR, which is standard definition, like regular YouTube videos or daytime sports, at just over 600 nits. To put that into perspective, the $300 TVs sitting next to it at Best Buy usually max out at about 250 nits. If you have a living room with a sliding glass door and the sun comes pouring in at 3 p.m., 250 nits means your TV turns into a giant useless mirror. You're just watching your own reflection. The U65QF actually has the horsepower to punch through that ambient room light, plus the integrated a quantum dot layer, the QLED tech, which means the color volume doesn't wash out when the brightness gets cranked up. HDR content on Netflix actually looks saturated, not pastel and flat, but, and this is a massive but, you have to pay the piper somewhere. I told you these companies are playing a zero-sum game, right? Hisense spent almost their entire build budget on that mini LED panel and the quantum dot filter, which means they had to rob Peter to pay Paul. The compromise here is the motion processing. I noticed something strange here when I first hooked it up. If you're watching a slow, moody cinematic thriller, it's gorgeous. But I threw on an NHL hockey game to test the fast panning performance. It's rough. The processor just doesn't have the silicon muscle to perfectly interpolate fast-moving objects across a high-contrast white background like ice. You will notice a slight judder, a tiny bit of stutter, when the camera whips from one side of the rink to the other. Also, the viewing angles are incredibly restrictive. If you're sitting dead center on the couch, you're getting 90% of the performance of a $1,000 TV. But if you move to the armchair off to the side, maybe 30-degree off axis, the color immediately washes out and you start seeing the backlight blooming around bright objects. It's a VA panel, which is great for native contrast, but terrible for wide seating arrangements. So you have to ask yourself, are you the cinematic darkroom streamer who sits right in front of the TV, or are you hosting Super Bowl parties where people are crammed into every corner of the room? Because if it's the latter, this TV will actively annoy your guests. Before I get into the next model, which completely solves that motion issue, I want to throw a question over to you guys. I'm mapping out our deep dive testing schedule for next month, and I want to know where you are getting burned. Jump into the comments right now and tell me what is the one specific tech product or home appliance that you bought thinking it was a great deal that completely failed or frustrated you within the first year. Let's get a running list going, and whichever category gets upvoted the most, I'll buy the top 5 models with my own money and tear them apart next. Seriously, let me know down below. If that Hisense feels like a compromise because you need to game or you just can't stomach the idea of motion. Stutter. This next one is where the math actually starts to make sense for a completely different type of buyer. If that Hisense feels like a compromise because you need to game or you just can't stomach the idea of motion stutter, this next one is where the math actually starts to make sense for a completely different type of buyer. Enter the TCL QM6K. Usually in the $55 and $450 range, finding a TV for a PS5 or an Xbox Series X is an exercise in pure misery. You'll look at a box at Walmart and it boldly claims motion rate 120 or effective refresh rate 120. It is a blatant orchestrated lie. What the manufacturer is doing is taking a cheap, slow 60 Hz panel and using a trick called black frame insertion. They are literally strobing the backlight on and off 120 times a second to trick your brain into thinking the motion is smoother. It's not. It just makes the screen dimmer and gives half the population a low-grade migraine. If the spec sheet doesn't explicitly say native 120 Hz or 144 Hz VRR via HDMI 2.1, you are getting a 60 Hz panel, period. But I actually had to do a double take when we unboxed the QM6K. I assumed this was just another BFI trick. Let me look closer at the main board. No, they actually gave us the bandwidth. TCL threw a native 120 Hz panel into a sub $500 television, and it even overclocks to 144 Hz if you plug a PC into it. It has legitimate variable refresh rate and auto low latency mode. When you fire up Spider-Man 2 on the PS5, you don't have to dive into 7 submenus to turn off the TV's artificial motion smoothing, so your controller actually responds. The TV detects the console, bypasses the internal image processing, and drops the input lag down to under 15 milliseconds. When you press the jump button on the controller, the character jumps instantly. It feels like a high-end gaming monitor that just happens to be 55 inches wide. And because it's running Google TV, it is a Swiss Army knife. You can sideload apps, customize the interface, and really tinker with it. But, and you knew this was coming, TCL had to pay for that expensive high refresh rate panel somehow. And the way they paid for it is going to drive some of you absolutely insane. First, the anti-glare coating on this thing is virtually non-existent. It is aggressively glossy. If you put this TV in a room with a lamp positioned behind your couch or a window facing the screen, you are going to be staring at your own reflection all day long. It's like they didn't even try to diffuse ambient room light. Second, I noticed something strange when I was running our audio sweep tests. I usually don't expect much from built-in TV speakers. We all know they're bad. They're downward-firing 15-watt paper cones crammed into a plastic chassis. But the QM6K has this specific hollow resonance. When I played a scene with heavy dialogue and low background bass, like a Christopher Nolan movie, the physical plastic chassis on the bottom right of the TV actually started vibrating. It creates this cheap rattling distortion at anything over 40% volume. Honestly, it brings up a massive point of friction in the industry right now. And I want to settle a debate right here. Jump into the comments. Are TV manufacturers right to put literal garbage speakers in these TVs, assuming we're all just going to buy soundbars anyway? Or is it an absolute insult to charge you $500 for something that sounds like an iPad trapped in a tin can? Let me know. Because personally, I think it's a cynical way to force you into spending another $150 on their branded soundbar. And that brings me to the other hidden risk of the TCL and really any budget TV running Google TV or Amazon's Fire OS. I mentioned this earlier, but you really need to understand the life cycle reality here. Year 1 with this TV, the honeymoon phase. It's great. Year 3, that's when the structural failures start. These operating systems are incredibly heavy. They are constantly pulling data from the Wi-Fi, loading auto-playing video ads on your home screen, and caching user data. The 2 GB of RAM inside the QM6K is barely enough to keep the UI smooth on day 1. After 2 years of firmware updates and app bloat, that UI is going to start feeling like you're walking through wet cement. You'll press the home button and the TV will just sit there and think about it for 3 seconds before reacting. Plus, we are seeing a massive trend in our long-term ownership data regarding HDMI handshaking. People will have an EARC soundbar plugged into these budget Google TVs, and around year 2, the TV just forgets the soundbar is there. You have to physically unplug both devices from the wall, wait 30 seconds, and plug them back in to reset the handshake. It's a daily annoyance that drives people up the wall. So, if you are not a gamer, if the idea of messing with Google TV settings and buying a soundbar just sounds exhausting, you need to completely pivot your strategy. You need to stop looking at the spec sheet entirely and start looking at the operating system's footprint. This is the Roku Plus Series QLED. You can grab the 55-inch for around $350 to $400, and honestly, if you catch a decent sale, you can get the 65-inch model for under $500. I know what the spec chasers are thinking. NextGen picks, it's capped at 60 Hz. It doesn't have HDMI 2.1. Why are we even talking about this? Because wait, let me frame this better. We review so many high-end OLEDs and enthusiast monitors on this channel that it is incredibly easy to get trapped in an echo chamber. I sometimes forget that the vast majority of normal human beings are not plugging $1,000 gaming PCs into their living room TVs. Most people just want to come home from work, collapse on the couch, press a button, and watch The Bear on Hulu. They don't care about variable refresh rate. They care about the fact that the TV actually turns on when they ask it to. The defining merit of the Roku Plus series is that it is fundamentally idiot-proof. The Roku operating system is a lightweight closed ecosystem. It doesn't require a heavy MediaTek processor to run because it isn't constantly rendering a 4K auto-playing ad for a movie you don't care about on the home screen. It is a simple static grid. Because the software is so incredibly light, the cheap processor inside this TV doesn't bottleneck. You press a button on this remote, and the TV reacts right now. Not in a second, not after a stutter, right now. And because it's not working the system on a chip to death, the thermal output on the back of the panel is drastically lower. Heat is the ultimate enemy of cheap electronics. When a budget TV runs hot, the solder joints weaken, the capacitors degrade, and the backlight LEDs burn out faster. The Roku runs cool, which is a massive indicator for longevity. Now, they still manage to pack a QLED layer in here, so the colors are surprisingly punchy, and it does have a basic local dimming feature. It's not the ultra-precise mini LED setup of the Hisense. You will definitely see a bit more blooming around subtitles in a dark room, but it easily beats the standard direct-lit garbage sitting next to it on the shelf. But you are sacrificing the ceiling of performance for absolute stability. And I need to warn you about the year one honeymoon failure that plagues this specific tier of manufacturing, regardless of whether you buy the Hisense, the TCL, or the Roku. It's called the panel lottery, and specifically the dirty screen effect, or DSE. When these companies assemble a budget TV, they use cheap plastic diffuser sheets between the LED bulbs and the LCD pixels to try and spread the light evenly. Because quality control is basically non-existent at the $400 level, these sheets are often pressed unevenly. If you put on a movie, you might never notice it. But the second you put on a golf tournament or a football game and the camera does a slow pan across a solid background of green grass or blue sky, you will see these faint vertical gray bands. It literally looks like someone wiped a dirty rag down the inside of your screen. Some panels have it terribly out of the box. Some are perfectly clean. It is a complete roll of the dice. This is exactly why you never ever throw away the box for a budget TV until day 14. If you get a panel with heavy DSE, do not let the manufacturer tell you it's within normal spec. Box it up, drive it back to Best Buy, and exchange it. You have to advocate for yourself here because the brands are counting on you being too lazy to return a 55-inch piece of electronics. So we have three drastically different profiles here. The mini LED powerhouse that struggles with motion, the 144 Hz gaming TV that vibrates its own plastic chassis, and the bulletproof lightweight Roku that taps out at 60 frames per second. The trick here isn't trying to find the perfect television under $500 because, frankly, it doesn't exist. The physics of manufacturing and component costs literally won't allow it. The secret is knowing exactly which flaw you are personally willing to live with and buying the screen that over-indexes on the one thing you actually care about. If you are plugging in a PS5 or an Xbox Series X, actually, let me broaden that. If you are plugging in literally any current generation console or even a gaming PC and you actually care about input lag, the TCL QM6K is your only real play here. It is the spec chaser's absolute dream at this price bracket. You just have to accept that you're going to be fighting brutal screen glare during the daytime, and you absolutely must factor a soundbar into your budget to bypass that rattling plastic chassis. Now, if you're setting up a living room for your parents, or maybe you just need a screen for the guest bedroom and you Refuse to deal with laggy, ad-filled Android menus. The Roku Plus Series QLED is the safest bet on the market right now. It's a TV that behaves like a television. You press the power button, it turns on. You hit an app, it opens. No HDMI handshake drops, no firmware panics, no clearing your cache just to watch the news. It caps at 60 Hz, yes. But for streaming Netflix and YouTube, that's literally all the bandwidth you need. But if we're talking about the absolute peak visual performance, if you want a display that punches so far above its weight class that it makes $1,000 edge-lit premium TVs look stupid, the Hisense U6FQ is the one. Yes, the off-axis viewing is terrible. If you sit to the side, it washes out. And yes, watching hockey or fast-panning sports on it might give you a slight headache from the motion judder. But if you turn all the lights off and sit dead center on the couch to watch Dune, the mini LED dimming zones do something that no other budget TV can do. They actually create pure inky black. Look, I know it is incredibly tempting to walk into Walmart, see a massive 65-inch screen from a brand you've barely heard of for $290, and just throw it in the cart. I get it. The box looks identical to the premium models. It has all the same shiny logos, the same promises of HDR and smart features. But here is the truth bomb that the display industry desperately tries to hide from you. Those ultra-budget sets are built with absolute bottom-barrel capacitors and zero thermal management. You put your hand behind one of those cheap sets after a 2-hour movie, and the plastic shell is physically hot to the touch. They are designed mathematically to fail the second your 1-year warranty expires. The backlight arrays burn themselves out because the processors are too slow and cheap to properly manage the voltage spikes. And even if the hardware survives, the smart TV software will become so bogged down with cached data that you'll want to throw the remote through the screen. If I'm spending my own money today, the Hisense U65QF takes the best overall spot. The sheer brightness and physical contrast control of that mini LED panel at $450 is just undeniable. But for best value, the Roku Plus series is the unsung hero of the year. It respects your time, it runs physically cool, and it avoids the OS bloat trap entirely. One last thing. Manufacturers are notorious for quietly swapping out internal components halfway through a production year. They'll send reviewers the good panel and then sneak a cheaper, darker panel into the retail boxes 6 months later. It's called a panel revision trap, and it happens constantly. I've tracked down the exact model numbers and safe versions of the 3 TVs we talked about today that avoid those bait-and-switch tactics. I put the vetted sources for those down in the description below, so you don't accidentally buy a downgraded mid-cycle revision. Thanks for watching. Let me know what category we're tearing apart next in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.